All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Garden of the Gods Visitor and Nature Center's Wildflower Photography program with Bob Falcone. We're really excited about this program this morning and so happy that you could all join us for this special online class.
More people in. Great. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here. And we're just letting a few more people in, and then we'll get started. I think we've got everybody.
Are you going to the garage?
Who's due to
Will
be
you grab
in.
the camera?
A couple of real quick things for everybody. Don't forget to mute your phones. And also, this is the first time we've done this as a online class. We typically do this in the classroom, then we go out into the field and play. So we're going to have a lot of different elements working in here, so bear with us as we switch screens and things like that, so we can show you all the different parts of this that we normally do during this class. So hopefully everybody gets them in there. We'll answer any questions as we can as we go along, but remember, the screen that you're looking at is the same one I'm looking at, so if you have a question, post it as a comment in the chat box, and I will answer it as soon as I see it, but I may have to, maybe take me a minute while I switch screens before I see that you've got a question there. And we'll get that going as soon as we can. Let me make sure we've got everybody. It looks like we do. Also, we are recording this, and this will be posted on my website sometime in the very near future, which hopefully won't be too much longer. We'll get this posted, so if you missed something today, we will definitely get that posted as soon as we can. So without any further ado, we'll get started here. Let me switch screens. Let's see how we do that. Yeah, there we go. And we're ready to go. Hopefully everybody can see that. And boom, we're good. Excuse me while I take my microphone off, or my face mask off. All right, so this is the photo. Can everybody see the? Everybody sees the slideshow. Thumbs up. Awesome. I see a lot of head shaking, a lot of thumbs up. Excellent. Great. Thank you so much. So this is going to be photographing wildflowers, and everybody can hear me okay, I'm assuming. I'm not hearing anybody say I can't hear you, so that works. Great. I see a thumbs up. Perfect. Thank you, guys. So we're going to talk about photographing wildflowers. We're going to start off with, oops, let's go back a little bit. There we go. So let's start off with a few basic rules of behavior. So while we're out taking pictures, first one is, of course, respect nature. We don't harm anything just to get a photo. So we don't cut down branches. We don't chop down flowers, even weeds. What you might think is a weed might actually not be a weed. Some of the pretty wildflowers we do take pictures of turned out to be weeds, but we won't get into that right now. It's okay to move things out of your way temporarily. So if there's a branch that's kind of in the way or a flower that's kind of in the way, it's okay to bend those out of place without damaging them. But we don't damage anything to get pictures. It's kind of not what we're here about. We're here to get pictures, but we're not here to be pruning trees and things like that. We don't disturb wildlife. So if there's a deer that's between you and the picture you want to take, well, and the deer's got priority. It'll
take the picture of the deer.
Get out of your way. Be a good ambassador. If any of you have been here for a while, you know that up near Denver Airport, there is the big field of sunflowers that people go get pictures of every August, September. And a lot of times they have trouble with people actually wandering into the wildflower field. That's actually a farm, and that's a crop for somebody. So we respect private property and usage restrictions. If you're not allowed to go someplace to get it, for whatever reason, then you're just not going to be able to go in there and get a picture. And of course, we've all seen the videos and pictures of people chasing elk around and chasing moose around and things like that, as you've seen in those videos. When that happens, it usually doesn't end well. So we're going to take care of being a good ambassador, respect private property, do not trespass. If you want to go someplace to get a picture and it looks like it's on private property, then by all means, just get permission to go in there before you go in. Nature First is an organization made up of nature photographers, and they're basically the principles that we follow. If you're a hiker, you know about Leave No Trace. This is very similar to Leave No Trace. We prioritize the well-being of nature over photography. We educate others about the places you photograph. Educate yourself about the place you photograph. But the idea is know where you're going to take pictures, have an idea how to get there safely, and don't just go trampling all over the place and just wiping out plants and things to get there. When you're out there taking pictures, watch what you're doing, reflect on the impact. So when I was out taking pictures just a couple of days ago, we were making sure that as we were getting into these fields to take pictures, we weren't just smashing down other plants and killing stuff just to get out there. Use discretion when you're sharing locations. As we know, social media has made it easy for everybody to tell everybody else where to go to take pictures. That's not always a good thing. So be kind of circumspect on how you tell people where to go. If you like posting stuff on your Facebook page or your Instagram account and you have 3,000 followers, giving out the exact location to where a picture was taken may not be the best thing. You can generalize where it was. Like pictures I took the other day were somewhere near Empire, Colorado. If people private message me, I will tell them. I'll make them promise not to tell. Of course, I can't, I hope that you're good for your word and you don't tell anybody where all those places were. Leave No Trace principles, and you can go to lnt.org for the Leave No Trace principles. Leave places better than you found them. So try not to just wreck stuff as you go out there. And promote and educate others about these principles. If you see somebody who's kind of not behaving well, kind of give them a little nudge and say, hey, could you not do that? So always be safe. Be careful about where you work. Make sure. The other day when I was out taking pictures, we were near abandoned mine shafts. So we had to be very careful about where we were stepping and not falling into a mine, which I'm sure you would agree, if we fall into a mine, that would be a bad thing. Don't put your camera bag on top of where bugs are running around. I actually had my camera bag the other day when I was out doing a thing for Fox 21. It ended up being where there was a mound of ants. So it took me the rest of the day to get all the ants out of my camera bag because I wasn't paying attention of where that was. So pay attention where you put your bag. Things get on your bag, and then they get on you, and then they get in your car, and then they get in your house. That's not a bad thing. Not a good thing. So be careful of that. Watch where you put your hands and feet and where you kneel. There's things like snakes and spiders and scorpions, and of course cactus. And I'm sure if any of us who's been doing this for a while will understand that you will probably have had the time where you've stuck your hand into a cactus, and that's usually pretty painful, and you spend the rest of the day with a small pair of tweezers and a pair of pliers and pulling cactus needles out of there. There are rattlesnakes in this area. However, we're going to be talking about a lot of places in the high country where there's not going to be any rattlesnakes, but there still may be other kinds of things you don't want to get your hands into. So just be careful about where you're putting your hands, your feet, and where you kneel. Be aware of your surroundings. Know who's around you. Know what animals may or may not be around you. That also goes for weather. Keep an eye on the weather. We'll talk a little bit about that. Okay, so we're going to talk about equipment here, and let me just see if we have anybody in the, I'm not seeing anybody in the chat room, so excellent. Everything we're going to talk about here today is not going to matter what kind of camera you use. So you don't need a DSLR, a big camera. We'll show you some camera examples here. You can get great pictures with your cell phone or a tablet or a small camera. You will get better pictures with a larger camera, and it's all about the size of the sensor, which is not the same thing as megapixels, which as you see here is pretty useless gauge of quality. I have, oops, sorry about that, went ahead. I have a camera. I started shooting digital with a 6.3 megapixel digital camera, and the files from that still make very great, great prints. What you want to do with your pictures will help you choose what you want to shoot with. So if you're an Instagram person or just want to post pictures on Facebook, your cell phone is going to give you great pictures.
Some cell phones have better cameras.
For those of you who follow my columns at The Independent, when I do those slideshows of the highlights, 99% of those pictures are actually just shot with my cell phone because it's easier for me to shoot it that way. If your main focus is social media, cell phone, or tablet will work just fine. Even small prints, they'll just work fine. If you want to make large prints, and we'll show some pictures that are behind me, then you're going to want a bigger camera. But equipment doesn't replace good techniques. There's a lot of really rotten pictures taken with very expensive cameras. It's all about knowing how to shoot some stuff. That's who we have next here. So what do you need? You're going to need a tripod, a remote. I'll show you those in a minute here. Wireless remote is best. Extra batteries or memory cards, a macro lens, extension tube. I'm going to show you all those here in a second. Close-up filters, macro focusing rail, and light modifiers. Everybody, please remember to mute your microphones. That would work out great. Thank you. We are picking up, somebody's got a microphone on, and we're picking up some background noise. So if you can do that, that'd be awesome. All right, I'm going to switch screens here for just a second. Okay, can everybody see me now? So we're all live again. So we'll talk a little bit about equipment. First thing we're talking about here is going to be a tripod. And you want a pretty nice tripod. You want a pretty sturdy tripod. Doesn't have to be anything super big or fancy. This one, and I'll just take this off. If you want a pretty nice tripod, I suggest a ball head for this kind of work, which is one of these kind of heads that you can just move around. And you can position it any place you want. They actually work out really well, and I highly recommend a ball head for this kind of work. The other thing you're going to need for your camera is a remote. And what I do with my camera is that I attach the remote. Let's bring it back here. I attach my remote to the tripod. When I'm going to use the remote, that's what I'm going to be using. So a wireless remote like this is for Canon. Nikon makes the same idea. And a lot of times you can also use an app on your cell phone to communicate with your camera. Canon makes a really nice app, so you can do it that way. That tends to be a little, trying to balance your cell phone and stuff. So the remote works out well. I just attach it with a clip to the tripod, and it works just fine that way. Extra batteries or memory cards. When you're shooting a lot of the stuff, you shoot a lot of this in what we call live view, and that is where your screen is live all the time. So when you're shooting in this mode, if you can see that, it's actually looking through the lens. When you're shooting in that mode, the LCD on the back eats up a lot of juice. So you're going to want to have extra batteries with you. I actually carry 5 of them that I cycle through. I won't go through 5 of them in one day of shooting, but I go through them so fast that I have 5 batteries that I just cycle through. It is a little bit of an expense. I just recommend that you get those as you can and go with that. So a lot of times you can do this with the zoom lens that is on that probably your camera came with. And this is an example of one here, which is a 24 to 105 millimeter zoom lens. And you can usually shoot most of the time with the zoom lens that's on here. The biggest restriction you have with these is just the ability to focus really close to something. Because typically your zoom lens can only get so close, and then you're not going to be able to focus in. So you can get a lot of good shots with your zoom lens. You may have to back up a little bit to be able to get that, but typically that's going to work out well for you. The other way to work with that is to get a macro lens, which is a specialized lens that allows you, that actually focuses in a lot closer. So for example, this one will focus to a life-size image to be able to get really tight close-ups. And when you see the wildflower pictures I have that we'll show you here in a little bit, almost 99% of them were shot with this lens. The issue with that is, however, these lenses tend to be pretty expensive, and you may not want to invest a lot of money in a macro lens to, for something like this, especially if you're not sure if you're going to do a lot of it. And I don't recommend you go out and buy one of these right away unless you're really sure this is what you want to do. So the other way to work with that is with an item called an extension tube. And the nice thing about these things are they're really inexpensive, and they're lightweight, and they have no glass in them. You see, I put my finger right through it. And what this does is it goes between your camera and your lens, and it allows your lens to focus much closer than it normally does. The only disadvantage when you have this on is you can no longer focus at infinity. So you can't leave this on all the time. You have to take it off when you're not using it. But these are really inexpensive. They're even more inexpensive if you do like I did, and you find a good used one, and you purchase one of these. We'll demonstrate how these work here in just a second. But I highly recommend extension tubes, especially if you're really not sure that you want to spend a whole lot of money on a lens like this. I do this a lot, so for me it was worth the investment, but I still use one of these occasionally. Especially if I'm hiking someplace, I don't want to carry a lot of weight, I'll carry my zoom lens in one of these instead of two lenses. The other way you can do this is also with what they call close-up filters. They're not really filters, but what they are is they're magnifying lenses that screw onto the front of your lens, and they basically just magnify the image. They're okay, but they tend not to be the best image quality. So I would say if you could find a set of those pretty inexpensively, buy them, but they're not the preferred way to do it. It's just not going to work well. Now, for people using cell phones, they do make pretty nice zoom lenses or magnifying lenses that snap over the front of your cell phone camera. They work pretty well because we work with such a small image, and they work, or a small sensor. They work pretty well. So if you're shooting with your cell phone, I definitely would recommend getting one of those clip-on zoom lenses or macro lenses. They work pretty well. With that, we'll just take a second. Does anybody have any questions so far? Anybody, any questions? You can just go ahead and either hit up the chat box or just holler out if you got any questions. I know I'm an Italian guy from New Jersey, so we talk kind of fast. Questions so far? Okay, cool. Let me move this back here. All righty. And also the other thing to remember is to have your owner's manual for your camera, especially if you're not familiar with your camera, is to have your owner's manual with you so that you can refer back to it if you're not sure of a setting. I had one of my cameras the other day, could not figure out how to get into manual focus, and it turned out there was a setting in there. The other thing, I'm showing you this big camera, big and heavy and unreasonably expensive. They make really small ones now, and this is a mirrorless camera. This is very tiny and very lightweight and fairly inexpensive. Definitely less expensive than the other camera. The image quality is not quite the same. The sensor is smaller, but if you're looking for something really lightweight, one of these cameras will work out really nice. And mirrorless cameras, where you're actually looking through an electronic viewfinder, which is what both of these cameras are kind of the trend that are going right now. Okay, ideal length for a macro lens would be in the 90 to 105 millimeter range. For people asking, this lens here is a 90 millimeter lens. Canon makes one this is made by a company called Tamron. Canon makes one that's 100 millimeters. Some companies make a 105. There's also 180 millimeter macro lenses for when you really can't get very close. They tend to be a little tough to use. You have to be a ways off. So 90 to 100 millimeters is 90 to 100, 105 is typically where to go. There are some smaller focal lengths like 65 millimeters that work pretty well. Cool. Any other questions while we're still here? Excellent. The other thing we like to use is what we call light modifiers. And what they do is they modify the light that comes in there. So they get rid of the harsh light and, excuse me, make sure I don't trip over this. They get rid of the harsh light and soften the light. They're basically like a big diffusing panel, sort of like this. We'll show you how to use one of these here in just a second. These are really great to get. This is a small one, about 20 inches across. I have a bigger one that's about 30 inches, and I have a really huge one. These are almost indispensable in our bright sunlight that we normally get here. They make the sun look a little diffused and get rid of the harsh shadows. The nice thing about these things is they're super, super inexpensive. You can go online and find a 33-inch one for about $20, and they'll last you about forever. And what they do is they fold up real nice in a small package like this, sort of like your sun shield in your car, and then you just fly open and fly away like that one did. And they work out really well. So those are available too. Those are a nice thing to have. And finally, the other thing I like to use is a macro focusing rail. And what that is this device here that basically it sits on the tripod. I'll demonstrate it here. Sits on the tripod, and then the camera sits on this. I hope everybody can see that. And what that allows me to do, when you're doing this kind of work, you really have to focus in close. So what that allows me to do is to micro adjust the distance of the camera to the flower that I'm shooting. So you can see how that works. It's not a 100% necessary expense. This one was about $100. They make some that are unreasonably expensive, and I could not find a reason to spend more than this on one of those. But they're handy to have, and if you're going to do a lot of this kind of stuff, I highly recommend one. But again, don't go out and buy a whole lot of equipment until you're sure this is the kind of stuff you want to do. I hate to see people spend a lot of money and then realize they didn't really want to do this kind of stuff. So don't go running out and buying one of those unless you're sure this is what you want to do, but it's a pretty cool thing to have. So here we are. We'll talk a little bit about software. There's a lot of different software you can get. Everybody knows about Photoshop and things like Lightroom. There are different plugins which work with software. Let me just bring the screen back up in case anybody wants to take a look at this. So there's different software that you can get, Photoshop or Lightroom, Paint Shop Pro, which is actually what I use. There's different plugins. Perfect Exposure is a really nice plugin, and what that does, it works within your software, and it lets you make a lot of adjustments really quickly. The Nick collection from a company called DxO has some plugins that let you do a lot of really good enhancements to your pictures. If you're a Windows 10 user and you don't want to go out and buy one of these pieces of software, I keep forgetting not to do this, a program called Aviary is available for Windows. Canon users can get a program called Digital Photo Professional for free. You just have to go to Canon website and download it. If you're using a cell phone, Snapseed and Aviary are both pieces of software. They work really well. I highly, highly recommend Snapseed for cell phone users. It's available for Apple and Android devices. It is really, really a nice piece of software. You can do some great things with your cell phone pictures before you post them on Instagram or on your Facebook page. It really works nice. And the beauty of it, it's free, and you can get a copy of that. Okay, so when to shoot. For your wide landscape shots, early morning is best because that's a day when the clouds aren't, I'm sorry, not the clouds, but the wind isn't blowing around so much. Typically, it's a still time of the day. When you're taking pictures of some flowers and they're on a tall stalk, like we have sunflowers blooming right now, those flowers are going to be moving all over the place. So you would, doing that during early in the morning when the wind's not blowing so much is a good time to do that. A day with some clouds, actually, some clouds in the sky is nice. a plain blue sky tends to be kind of boring. So if you have some puffy white clouds in the sky to eat up some of that blue sky, is a great time to shoot. When you're doing the tight close-up shots, a cloudy, or what I like to call a bright overcast day, basically that's a day where there's that thin layer of clouds, and you know, it's not dark, gloomy type of cloudy, but it's still bright, but there's no harsh shadows. That's a great time to shoot. But as we showed you with that diffuser, there's a way to, you can modify that because you don't always have control over what kind of light you're going to shoot with on any day. For close-ups, bright direct sunlight is typically not your friend. You want some diffused light, no wind. Wind picks up later in the day, especially around here in the afternoon when the storms start to roll through. You know they're coming because the wind is kicking up. And shoot as soon after the flowers bloom as possible, especially with the hot, dry weather we've had. We haven't had any rain in a while. These flowers are kind of burning up pretty quickly. So you don't want to, you see flowers starting to pop up, you want to get pictures. You want to get those as soon as you can because after this heat we have, they're going to start to wilt away pretty quickly, especially unless we start getting some weather. That's about how it's going to be. So just keep an eye on when the flowers are blooming. All right, let's see what we got here. So here's an example of a bright, sunshiny, direct sunlight on these flowers. You can see it's kind of harsh. You have a lot of shadows right in here. The background is kind of half light and half dark. Really not, it's an okay picture, but it's not a great picture. But then you can see now we used it, we shot this on a more overcast day, or I think I used a light modifier. You see how it evened out the lighting. You don't have a lot of harsh shadows. You don't have a lot of highlights and shadows in the background to kind of take things up. It's a much better, I think a more pleasing picture. You can work on this and your software later and brighten up the background if you want a little bit. But you see how that changes things a little bit. Let me go here and demonstrate some of these principles. We've kind of gone through this pretty quickly. Are there any questions while we're here? Any questions at all? Okay. What I'm going to do here for you in just a second here is I stole one of my wife's flowers. So since we can't go outside and do this, we're going to do this with a potted plant. But we're all talking about technique here, not the subject matter. And give me just a second to switch leads here. And what's nice, I can actually plug in my camera and you can actually see what I'm looking at. Any questions on anything so far? While we're here, waiting for me to plug everything in. Talk about tripods too. What's nice to have is sometimes like a small tripod like this one, a small mini tripod. This is pretty handy to have, especially if you're, you're camping or you're backpacking. You don't want to carry a big tripod. This is a nice one to have. You can take that with you. We'll demonstrate a couple of different things here real quick. Let's see. All right, so I'm going to switch you guys over to the camera. And let's get this set up. Okay, so I hope everybody can see a blurry picture of a flower. So here what we have here is we have a flower, we have that zoom lens, and as you can tell, one of the problems we have here is we're too close to focus. See, it just can't focus on there. Now this is a pretty small flower, so we want to get pretty close. We just can't zoom in on that and get a and be able to focus. So we can do one of two things here. We can put on an extension tube, so I'll show you how that works. And then we can put on a macro lens. So first I'll show you the extension tube and how it works. Actually, I can't do that on this lens. Hang on one second. Let's do it on something else. Give me just a second. What I'm putting on this camera is a big honking telephoto lens, which I actually use it to take a big zoom lens, usually used for wildlife, but it's also handy for when you can't necessarily get too close to your subject. So let's see if we're all online here. All right, so hopefully you all can see that. So basically now this is a big telephoto lens. I'll switch to the camera here in a second, show it to you. Let me just do that right now. So this is the lens we're shooting with. So you can see this is a big telephoto lens. Now typically with a lens this big, you cannot focus this close. You can see basically the flower. We're only inches away from it. But what we're able to do here with this setup is to get really close. Oops. Let me switch back. So what happens here now, that extension tube goes in the middle, and now you can see that I can actually take this big, huge lens and focus very tightly on that flower. Everybody see that effect there? So these extension tubes are pretty handy to use. And I am literally just a few inches away with that lens. So everybody can see how that's working there. So that works out really well. Any questions on this so far, anything? Either hit up on the chat or I see a chat request. Are there different strengths of extension tubes? Good question. There are not strengths per se, but there are different sizes. So this one is 25 millimeters in size, so it's 25 millimeters from front to back. There's also, I also have one that's 12 millimeters. So there are different sizes of them, I guess you could say. It's not a strength or anything, but and they affect how close you can focus. I shoot most of my stuff with the 25 because it gives me just the right combination. But yeah, there are different sizes of extension tubes. So you can find those, you can find different sizes for that. It's a very good question. Thank you. Any other questions while we're on here? So while we're here, I'm going to show you how some light modification works. As you can see, that lighting in this room is kind of harsh. So what we do is we take, and I'll show you how this looks in a second. But can anybody see how that light? So you see there's harsh shadows, and then we bring that light modifier in here, and you can see how it softened that light a bit. And let me switch back, and I'll show you what I'm doing here. I'll go back to the camera. So everybody kind of see how this is working. I have the light modifier between the light, which would normally be like the sun, and the flower. I hope you can see that. It's kind of awkward. I'm trying to hold a bunch of stuff here. But basically what that does, and you can see as it goes away. So if we look at that flower, the lighting is a little harsh. Everybody see that? And then we bring this in and it softens the light. The other thing you want to do with this is you want to move your light modifier back and forth a little bit. If you move it back too far, it just becomes a shade, which is okay. But the idea is actually to cause the light to soften. So you usually want to get that as close to your flower as possible. And actually soften that light a little bit instead of just making some shade. Let me just switch back here. And I want to show you one more thing that we do here. The other thing when you're doing this kind of work, you want to manually focus your camera if you can. I'm manually focusing right now, and I'll show you why. Autofocus typically, as you see the size of the sensor here, that square box is actually the size of the sensor that's focusing. It is hard for that camera to figure out what exactly I'm trying to focus on. And it typically is not going to get as close as I would like. So a lot of times what you want to do is you want to, see how that's not quite in focus? That was auto-focused. So if I switch this lens to manual focus, you'll see that I'll be able to tweak that in just a little more. And now that's actually focused better than the autofocus was. So when you're focusing on something really tight, you want to manually focus it if you can. Now, of course, if you're going to do this, you have to have a tripod. You can see how we're mere inches away. Trying to hold a big lens like this, and just your breathing is going to move that camera in and out. You really want to tripod it and manually focus it. How to hold the diffuser and run the camera at the same time. It tends to help to have a friend to help you with that. This is also where you're going to have your camera on a tripod, and this is where the remote control really helps. The other thing that's useful is a lot of these cameras have articulating screens. So the screen on the back pops out and you can move it in different directions. There's been times where I've actually had the lens, the screen turned all the way around so it's facing the front, and standing in front of the camera, holding the diffuser, watching the screen, and then using the remote to actually take the picture at the same time. Do you feel like a monkey doing that stuff? Yeah, you do, but it actually works out pretty well. I actually have pictures of my mom helping me by holding a diffuser while I've taken pictures. So if you have somebody to help you with that, that works out really well. But yeah, it's a lot of times you got to do a couple things all at the same time. And usually what you're going to do is you're going to sit there and focus this without the diffuser, then you're going to take the diffuser and put it on, and then you're going to go ahead and take your picture. As you can see, any little motion here is shaking the picture. So this is where having a remote control is a great idea, because right now, if I wanted to take this picture, you see just me touching the camera shakes it. If I had, and I don't have the remote turned on, but if I had the remote turned on, I could take this picture without touching anything, and that's also going to increase your sharpness and not shake the camera. So a remote control or being able to control the camera through a cell phone app is really the way to go with that. So there we go. Again, here's the effect of the diffuser. You can see it's kind of harsh light, but you see how that light really softens up a bit. And I think that's just a more pleasing picture. There are some times when direct sunlight works. The other day I was taking some pictures and there was some wildflowers, a sunflower in Cheyenne Mountain State Park, and it turned out that flower was just oriented perfectly where it was facing right at the sun and all the light was exactly falling where I wanted to. That was actually a case where direct sunlight worked really well, but that tends to be the exception and not the rule. So you usually want to soften it or take pictures while there's some overcast weather. Okay, any questions on any of this so far? How are we doing there, folks? And feel free to turn off your mic and holler if you want to when I'm looking for questions, or like I said, if you hit me up on the chat box, I'll see that and I'll answer any questions that come up on there. Somebody said if you get several different sizes of the extension tubes, you can't stack them to get different effects. It's true. The nice thing about extension tubes, there's no glass in there to degrade the image. It's just a hollow tube, so that works out really well. Thanks, Dave, for mentioning that to everybody. Okay. go back to the, actually, let's go back to the, thank you all for bearing with me. I knew we were going to be shuffling things around a bit. There we go. So we covered when to shoot. And then we want to talk a little bit about choosing your subject. Now, obviously, this potted plant I have here is not the greatest image. It's a really small flower. It's a farmed flower, so to speak. It's not a, any flower that you think looks nice makes a good subject. So it's like any kind of art, whatever you like is what you should take pictures of. And how you shoot can make the subject interesting. So these are past flowers, and we tend to have a habit of shooting pictures from straight on. So we stand over the flower, we look down at it, and we take its picture. I like this one because I was able to take this nice array of 3 of them in a fan shape, and trust me, did not manipulate that at all, and shoot it from the side, and I thought it made a much nicer picture than just shooting these past flowers, which are gorgeous flowers. But I thought it made a nicer picture by shooting it from the side, and there was a little bit of backlighting. You can see that there's some translucent light coming through. I did use a light modifier to diffuse the light a little bit, but I think that made a nicer picture by being able to shoot it from the side instead of from just overhead. When you're shooting one flower or several, this is really important. Fill the frame as much as you can. You see a lot of pictures out there with a flower that obviously somebody wanted to take a picture of, but there's so much space around it, you lose the flower in the picture. You want to actually get in there close and shoot, as close in as you can. Look for flowers that stand out from the background. Here's the other thing I really want to focus on is watch for distracting things around your flowers. You'll want to take a picture of some flowers, and there may be some twigs behind it, some dead leaves. They're going to draw your eye away from the flower. It's okay to move these dead things away from the background of your picture. The other thing is when you're lining up your shot, make sure there's not like a telephone pole that's sticking out of the background, or a building or a person walking by or something like that. Keep an eye on your background. Keep an eye on anything that distracts your image from your main image. Choose a nice, healthy, intact flower. Nobody wants to see pictures of wilty flowers unless you're taking it because you just want to ask somebody later on what that is. You don't want to get pictures of wilty flowers. Get a nice, healthy one. On this one, you can see, here's an example of not filling the frame. So you can see those are cinquefoils. They're nice, but there's a lot of stuff around that really doesn't pertain to the image. It's pretty distracting. Really should be a lot closer. So here's an example of filling the frame. This is a side view, a wide view of the picture of the flowers. You can see there's flowers all the way back. Focused here in the middle on these blue flowers out front, but you've got red flowers and yellow flowers. The focus is right on the front of these blue flowers. You can see where the frame is filled with flowers, and you're not really lost in anything. It's a much nicer picture than this one where there's some yellow flowers, but there's a whole lot of dead space behind it. When you're taking pictures, take your time. There's no hurry. The flower's not going anywhere. Of course, the problem is you have to watch for the weather. If it's windy, forget about it. The exception to that would be, I think, is when you're shooting, when the cactus blossoms are in bloom. The nice thing about cactus is they lay low to the ground and they're not on tall stalks. So windy days are good days to get pictures of the cactus blossoms, especially the prickly pear. They make beautiful pictures, and it almost doesn't matter how windy it is. So if it's a windy day, maybe that's a day, especially earlier in the season, to go out and look for the cactus blossoms. We're almost all done with those now, so keep that in mind for next year. It's okay to clean up and remove dead leaves, broken twigs, to push things aside, but don't hurt them. So if there's a blade of grass that keeps getting in your way, it's okay to move that aside, let it pop back up later. You don't want to distract from your picture, but remember, we're not trying to hurt anything here. Compose your picture carefully. Watch the foreground and background. Focus carefully. We kind of showed you that. I'm going to switch this camera back here to the macro lens in just a second here and show you how that works. But really what you want to do is you want to focus carefully. You want to use manual focus when you can. You want to have a good understanding of depth of field, and I'll show you that here in just a second. Your depth of field is very limited when you're doing this. Remember I was telling you how if you try to handhold some of these pictures, you're going to, just your breathing and moving back and forth will take the picture in and out of focus. So you need to understand depth of field and manually focusing your camera. I'm going to bring this back up here just a second. Any questions so far? All right, we're going to flip this back. Bear with me a second here. I'm trying to get this to work. Okay, is everybody seeing a blurry image on the camera? So this is the actual macro lens. This is the lens designed for actually macro shooting. "99% of the time I use this lens in the manual focusing mode. If you're using a camera with live view, so one of the new mirrorless cameras or your compact camera, or even your cell phone, you want to enlarge the, you want to magnify your image. Now this doesn't magnify the picture, just magnifies what you see on your screen. Now that kind of looked, when we were back here, that kind of looks in focus, right? But as you can see, when we zoom in, yeah, not so much. So let's.
I'm not seeing a photo. I'm seeing a screenshot of a menu.
I'm sorry, say that again?
I am not seeing a picture that's being focused. I'm seeing like a setting in the menu.
Okay, hang on one second. Thank you. Let me fix that for you. There we go. Had the wrong one. Okay, now you seeing it? Thumbs up? Great.
Yes,
Sorry
thank
about
you.
that. So basically, we'll go back here. That looks like that's in focus, right? So if you're standing there and you're taking a picture and you're not enlarging your screen, that looks like that's in focus. But as we zoom in, again, this is just zooming in on the preview, not actually the picture, but as you can see, that's really not in focus at all. So we can zoom in here or focus in. Now you can see we got that focus a whole lot tighter. And what we're focusing on is the middle here. You gotta tweak this a little bit. But focusing in on the center of the image, and you can even get even closer and really tweak that image a bit and really focus. Now this is, I'm doing this on a table that's not very steady, so apologize for that shaking around. But the idea here is you really want to just really play with that a little bit and just get in as close as you can. And you see I moved that camera about an inch and completely out of focus. So I'll just tweak it again a little bit. Again, that looks like it's in focus, but we get there and it's just not quite there. See how much better that looks right there? So you want to use your magnifying feature on your live view to get this. And if you're looking through the viewfinder, you're not going to see this necessarily because that viewfinder is looking at the whole picture. You can't necessarily zoom that in. So the live view feature on the back of your camera. On your cell phone, you can zoom in and you could do the same thing. Now, on a cell phone, this is hard to do. They do make attachments for tripods that you can clamp your cell phone onto, and I highly recommend getting one of those so you can actually put your cell phone on a tripod and get in even closer. And this is the actual 90mm macro lens, so it gets very close. It's also an extremely sharp lens. So the pictures that come out of this are very crisp. I'm having a hard time getting this because the table is moving. But I think you all are getting the idea of what we're talking about here. How do you deal with sunshine making it difficult to see the live view picture on the LCD? Great question. I'll show you two things that we do for that. One of which is you can typically crank up the brightness on the LCD and bring up the camera. But there is an item called a lens hood. I think that's what they're called. A lens hood, and it is this device here. And what it basically does, let me show you here, is you put this over your LCD, and what it does is it enables you to shield the bright sunlight from, you shield it from the bright sunlight, and then you look through the viewfinder here. Let's see if we can get close. And look at your display. So this helps a lot. There are different varieties of these at different costs. It's not something I have to use very often, so it may not be something you always need, but I find if you're using your cell phone to shoot, then of course that's not going to be that much of an issue. But typically, either just shading it with your hand or using one of these devices is a good way to be able to look at your LCD while in bright sunlight. It's a little awkward to use, but yeah, sometimes you have to do it. It doesn't have a zoom feature, but it can focus it a little bit, so you can just focus it on the back of the screen. Of course, when you're focusing this, you're not focusing the image, you're just being able to see how well you can see the screen. Any other questions? Not seeing any, but any other questions? Cool. All right, let's go back to PowerPoint real quick. So when you're taking the picture, one of the things you want to look at is, we talked a little bit about composition and background. So here we have this picture. I shot this down in the southern part of the state, and a Mariposa lily with some harebells behind it. And that's not a bad picture, but it's really not a great picture. If you look at it, it's vertical images that I'm shooting horizontally. You can see that band of blue sky in the background kind of draws your eye away from it. So it's really not, it's an okay picture. I would call this an okay picture, but it's not a great picture. So what we're going to do is, first thing I did when I was shooting this was I got in a little closer. So you can see now I got rid of that blue band in the background and made that a little easier. It took away the distraction that was in the background there. So that made this picture a little better. But the problem is I'm still taking a picture of a vertical image, but I'm shooting this horizontally. So that kind of doesn't work so well. So we got in, I went and did one more thing, and I turned the camera sideways. And everybody see how that picture turned out to be a whole lot better? It's vertical image, shot vertically, cropped in nice and tight, focused in on this. And what I was trying to get here was just the different flowers, the different colors. I also blurred the background, so those you notice if you go back, there's a lot of weeds sticking up in the background. I moved some stuff out of the way. So now I have a picture that's a much cleaner picture. So this is an example of when you're taking pictures, this is the first thing I shot, and I looked at it in my camera, I said, well, that looked kind of terrible. So I said, let's get rid of that blue background, that sky back there. And I got here, and that looks a little better, but still got a lot of distractions. And then I turned the camera on its side, and now we get that picture. So I think you can see how moving this around a little bit makes for a better picture. Here's another example of getting in nice and tight. There's a couple of past flowers that I shot. Of course, you know, I talked about not shooting everything from above, but this turned out to be a great picture from above. Shot that and cleared most of the distractions in the background. The thing to watch for is you see these images, and I don't know if you can see my mouse pointer, but these lines here, these are like little twigs and grass. You don't look like much when you're looking at them, but they become kind of distracting lines there. So sometimes you want to just move those around a little bit. So in your computer, you can darken those so they're not quite so obvious. But you want to get in nice and tight like this one. Not a lot of open space around it. A little bit of breathing room. You don't want to have your frame, the petals or the camera or the flower go right to the edges. You want a little breathing room, especially if you're going to print this and then you're going to frame it. You want to have some breathing room around it, but got in fairly close. Again, here's the one that we shot from the side, which I think was just a different picture. So one of the things I talked a little bit about was depth of field, which is your aperture on your camera that controls how much is basically is how much of your scene is in focus. So a smaller aperture, which is a larger number, lets in less light, but also increases how much of the scene is in focus. The smaller the aperture, though, you need a longer shutter speed to be able to get enough light. It's kind of if you let in less light, you have to take longer to take the picture. If you let in more light, you take less time to take the picture. So you need it, and your camera will figure all that stuff out on its own. But when you go to a longer shutter speed, a longer time taking the picture, you increase the chance of a blurred picture from the subject or the camera moving. Again, this is why we can't take pictures when it's windy, because everything's in and out of focus. We don't have much depth of field. And this is why you also want a tripod to shoot your pictures. Here's kind of an example of how the aperture range works. I think people kind of understand what I'm talking about. And please don't forget to mute your microphones for us. Unless you've got a question, feel free to unmute and holler or hit the chat. So here's an idea of how aperture works. As you can see, if you look at this here, the small number, f22, is a very small opening, but your depth of field, how much is in focus from front to back, is greatest, but it lets in less light. So because of that, you have to go to a longer shutter, a shorter shutter speed, which is a longer amount of time. And so you really have to have that flower be still, because you don't want it to be moving around while you're taking a picture. Some of these pictures you've seen may have been exposure times of a half a second. And to give you an idea of what we're talking about there, when you're taking a picture outside in broad daylight, your picture may be taken at 1/1000th of a second or 1/12500th of a second. So when you're talking a half a second to take a picture, that really is a long time to be taking a picture. Any questions on how this depth of field works or anything? I see a chat. Do I ever use flash or light in daylight? I tend not to, because it's just one more thing I have to deal with. There are some arms that are made that attach to a camera with small flashes that you can shoot from angles. I don't have those. I just have a flash that goes on top of the camera. So of course that goes back to being very directional light. I know people who do it. I do not use a flash or other light. I already have enough things that I'm trying to juggle. So I typically don't do that. When focusing or picking aperture, do you overexpose a bit to compensate for the diffuser? You'll add in, no, because what happens is when you put the diffuser in there, the camera's gonna adjust for it, and it'll just make the adjustment to adjust for the light loss, a little bit of light loss from the diffuser. Great question. But the answer is no, I don't tend to overexpose. You can if you'd like, it gives you a little bit, but you gotta be careful you don't expose too much that you blow out the highlights and then you can't get any detail. So the answer to your question, the short answer is no. The long answer is your camera will adjust for that and will work just fine there. Any other questions on depth of field? I'll show you some examples here. So here's a picture of some sunflowers I shot. This is an example of pretty shallow depth of field. So I'm focusing on the sunflower you see, the one that's obviously the one that's in focus. And then the other sunflowers, I wanted them to add a little bit of element of some light and some color, but I wanted your eye to go to the one in the front. So this is very shallow depth of field. We're focused in the front. The other stuff, all the other elements are out of focus. They add a little bit of color, but they're not in focus. On the other hand, here we have a Mariposa lily. I'm shooting this from above. And here I have a lot of depth of field. I'm focused right on the center of this flower, but I wanted this whole flower to be in focus. So I have a small aperture and a lot of depth of field. Also, I'd have a very still day because this took probably the better part of a second to take this picture, but I was able to get that picture. So this is an example of a lot of depth of field. You can see everything from the petals all the way to the bottom of the flower. And this flower, when they're bloom, is about 2 inches tall. So doesn't sound like a lot, but when you're focused in close, 2 inches is quite a bit to get in there. So this is an example of using a lot of depth of field. So again, here's very shallow depth of field. We're focused on the front, not on the back. And this is an example of having a lot of depth of field, really being able to get the entire picture in, the entire flower in the picture. Stabilize the camera. We talked a little bit about that. A tripod is an absolute must for tight close-ups. It's really a good idea all the time. You'll always see landscape photographers using a tripod. It's just the best way to get a sharp picture. You don't want to touch anything once you get it lined up, even the camera. As you saw, every time I touched the camera, when I had the live view on, you can see that it just took everything out of focus. So a reminder, a remote is good. If you don't have a remote, your camera will have a self-timer feature. So you can basically hit the camera and then it goes into a delay. And hopefully by the time the camera stops moving is when the timer kicks in and actually takes the picture. The problem with that is if you have something that's moving, getting that timed right is not always that easy. So really a remote is still the preferred way to do it. Let's see. Thought I had another question here, but now I'm not seeing it. How do you deal with sunshine, making it difficult when focusing and picking aperture? Do I use mirror lockup? With a regular SLR, you do use mirror lockup. With the mirrorless cameras, there's no mirror to begin with, so there's no mirror lockup necessary. You don't have a mirror at all. You're looking straight through. Basically, the display is right off the sensor. So if you have a regular SLR, yes, I would suggest using mirror lockup in conjunction with live view. If you're using a mirrorless camera, there's no need because you don't have a mirror to begin with. Good question. And of course, with your cell phone, there's no mirror either. Good question. Thank you for asking. So that's an example of a lot of different things going on at the same time. That's the camera on a focusing rail right here, on a tripod, looking down at the flowers, macro lens, diffuser kind of propped up next to it. There's a whole lot going on there. But you can see that it sometimes takes several minutes to set up one of these pictures, to get everything all lined up, and then of course then wait for the wind to stop blowing so you can get the camera. One other thing about tripods is when you get a tripod, you'll notice that some tripods have a center brace that braces to the center post. That's usually an indication of a pretty cheap tripod that's not going to be very stable. I would suggest getting one. You don't need, if you have a good if it's a well-made tripod, you don't need that. The other thing is, if you don't have that center brace, you can adjust the angle of each one of these legs separately, and that allows you to compensate for varied terrain. You can see that this leg toward the back here is at a different angle than the leg up front because I was on a hillside. And that enabled me to get a really steady picture and really be able to line up the camera exactly the way we want it. You can see the ball head turned. Everything, this was a lot of manipulating, a leg this way, a leg that way, the head turned this way, the camera turned on its side, a lot of things going on here to be able to get that picture lined up. Live view, every DSLR has it. Phone or compact camera, mirrorless has it. Shoot the picture and then examine it closely. The other thing to remember is when you're shooting your picture with your camera, it is shooting with the widest aperture, the least amount of depth of field. So you're not necessarily going to see what's in focus with your depth of field until you actually take the picture. So a lot of things that may not be obvious are going to show up later on when you actually take the picture. So if you have distracting elements, you may not actually see them when you're looking through the viewfinder or looking at the live view. But when you take the picture and you have increased depth of field, you'll then see all the other elements that are in focus. So you basically want to shoot the picture, look at it, see what's distracting you, move those things or readjust your position, and then go back and take the picture, then look at it again. You're just using space on a memory card, so you can always go back and clean up that memory card later and make more room if you have to. But look for those distractions. Here's an example of using the live view when shooting some columbines. This is with an older camera. It did not have an articulating screen. The new ones do. Oops. Okay, so that's it for the slideshow part of things. And pretty much what we have here. Are there any other questions or anything that we haven't covered, or anything you want me to go back over, or everything? It's pretty simple to shoot these pictures. You basically just want to look carefully at what you're taking a picture of. I think the biggest thing I see when I see people taking pictures is that they're not paying attention to background and they're not getting in tight enough. So when I look at somebody's pictures, it's really a matter of telling them to get in a little tighter and pay attention to what their background is. If you do those things, you're really going to increase the quality of the pictures you get and really get some really good stuff. Anybody have any questions or anything like that? I really appreciate that. Do I ever use focus bracketing, or maybe you mean focus stacking? That's another question I have. I don't when I'm doing this kind of work, because when you're shooting outside, especially when there's a little bit of a breeze blowing and that flower is in and out of focus, it's really hard to line up those shots to do focus bracketing. Now here in the classroom, where there's no breeze, I could do that with this flower I'm taking a picture of. For people who are wondering what that is, focus stacking is where you take a picture and you macro adjust the focusing a little in front, a little bit in front, a little closer to what you want, the item in focus and a little bit behind it. And then you have software that piles those together and allows you to take those pictures, and everything is in focus from front to back. That's good to do in a studio. Outside, when the wind is blowing and things are blowing around, it's almost impossible to line those up, because what has happened is that item can't move at all, because when you stack them, everything has to be lined up perfectly. So no, I do not use that out in the field. It's just almost impossible to make that work. There's always too many things moving around. Any other questions or anything? We will post this. I think I mentioned online, we will post this on my website. So those of you who are looking for it, hikingbob.com, and I will have a link to it there. Any other questions, comments, anything I didn't cover, anything you want me to go back over? I know we covered a lot of stuff here. Usually by now we'd be going out into the field and practicing and putting this to good use, but obviously that's not happening today. Hopefully next year when we do this class, we'll do that. And so if you see this class advertised again next year, and we should be doing it then, we may be actually able to all get together and actually go out and shoot this stuff. Any other questions or anything? Let's see, when is your next class? What do you think of things like Lens Baby? Lens Baby, for people who are wondering, is it kind of a lens you can buy? They give you different special effects. They make a wide variety of them. I have one called the Control Freak, which moves things in different directions. They can sometimes be a little bit of a handful to use, but they do give nice effects where things are in focus and out of focus and blur effects. I think they're great. It's another good tool to use. So I think Lens Babies are really handy to have. I suggest looking at them. They make a lot of different products, so look for the one that you like the most. They're not horribly expensive, which is also a nice thing about that. My next class, to be honest with you, we don't have one planned right now. We may be doing something in the fall for fall color photography, and hopefully by then we may be able to all get together. We've done fall color photography here in the Garden of the Gods in the past, and hopefully we'll be doing that also in the spring. And maybe in the fall again, we'll do one where we walk around the Garden of the Gods and I show you different places to shoot the Garden of the Gods is not just a shot from 30th Street here that everybody else takes, other angles and different places to shoot the garden. Hopefully we'll have those classes coming up. That one, obviously, you can't really do virtually. We have to be out there to do that. We hike around the park a little bit. I'm not sure what we're doing. We're kind of waiting for waiting to see what happens with this whole crisis and whether we can all get together soon. Landscape and night photography. Night photography, I don't do a class on that. For that, I would suggest there's a friend of mine, his name is Mike Pock. His name is P-A-C-H. I suggest looking him up. He does some really great night photography classes, especially want pictures of the Milky Way and stuff like that. I suggest looking him up for those classes. How do I carry everything? A backpack or a duffel bag? Good question. Let me get that for you. So I carry everything in a backpack. And it carries quite a bit of stuff. This one's made by a company called Think Tank. And I like theirs because it's compact, but it carries, and I don't know if you can see, but it carries quite a bit. Everything you've seen here today has been packed in this bag, including the big telephoto lens, the macro lens, the camera, spare batteries, cables, spare memory cards, all that stuff fits in that pack. Can get a little heavy. Some of the stuff is kind of heavy, but everything fits in there. I do carry when I'm hiking. I have a small waist pack that fits the camera and 1 or 2 lenses and maybe an extra battery for when I'm going a long distance. I don't really want to carry this big behemoth of stuff, so I do have a small one. And of course, like I mentioned earlier, for when I'm hiking and stuff, this is the camera I carry because it's so much smaller. If I'm going out just hiking and I'm not intending to take pictures, I'll take this camera with me. But if I'm intending to really get some good high quality big pictures, then of course I'll carry the bigger camera and bigger lens. But it does add quite a bit of weight. Any other questions? If you want to, if you go to my website, hikingbob.com, there's a link there to where you can sign up for a newsletter that I put out every week. And basically, it's a summary of the column I wrote for The Independent that week and also my podcast from that week, both of which I do weekly. There's a link to that. Also, any announcements for things like this seminar or any other classes or anything like that that I might be doing are linked on there. So if you want to sign up for the newsletter, it's only once a week. I try not to pester anybody or be annoying or anything like that. Occasionally, I'll slip in a coupon code for a discount at my photography store where you can purchase some photography. And as a matter of fact, we're all going to be wearing masks. So if you're interested in nice, colorful masks, I'm selling masks that actually have my pictures on them. Any one of the pictures on my website can also be made as a nice double layer cloth mask if you're wanting to wear one of those. So any other questions or anything? Comments? Feel free to email me or email Elizabeth at the Garden of the Gods if you have any comments on the class or any questions. We'd really like to know how it flowed. This is a little different, switching back and forth a lot. I'm usually used to doing this in front of a bunch of people. So this is a little different. I know I keep looking off to the side, but I'm looking at the computer to see if anybody has anything. If that's it, we'll say goodbye. Thank you all so much for being here and taking time out of your day to participate in this class. And we'll talk to you next time. Thank you so much.